programme this week, I take to the track in not one, no sir, but two Lotus sports cars, the Elise and the Exige. Thank you. Rob Hallam takes time to ponder the future for Rover. And Ian Royle's used car bargain of the week is the Audi A4. Lotus endured a pretty turbulent time in the 90s, passed like the parcel at a kiddie's party from General Motors ownership to the failed Bugatti outfit and onto Proton. When the original Elise was launched 4 years ago, the company's future depended upon it being a great car, which, fortunately, it was and still is in the 21st century, when Lotus is thriving. With Vauxhall VX220 snapping at their heels, Lotus have taken the time to update their Elise. Producing a follow-up to one of the great cars of the 90s was never going to be an easy task, and this week we find out whether they've managed it as we test drive the new Lotus Elise. And to brighten up these winter months, just for the fun of it really, we've brought along one of the last evolutions of the previous Elise, the race-born Exige. Now, whilst the previous model Elise was, thank you, enormous fun to drive, its looks were really not to everybody's taste. I'm not saying it was ugly, just a bit soppy looking, and certainly with none of the menacing road presence that its performance really deserves. So this new version has been toughened up. It's got a more aggressive front end with these slanted snake eyes. The sides have been more sculpted and it's got a more waspish waist, which in turn makes the rear look more beefed up. And then at the very rear end, there's definitely something of the forthcoming production supercar, the M250. When they set out to design the original Elise, practicality wasn't just at the bottom of the wish list, it wasn't on there at all. At least that's certainly what you'd be left thinking after you spent half an hour or so wrestling with the canvas roof poppers and Prescott's on the previous Elise. On a dismal day as well, some drivers have claimed to experience anything from a few drips getting through to entire waterfalls. This though is the new Elise and things have been improved, so it gets a new roof. Well, it may have been improved, but it's still not exactly a doddle. Right, now getting in. With the previous model you did have to be a bit of a contortionist, but for this new one, well, it's hardly easy, but the doors are wider and lower and longer. And more importantly, this sill is a lot narrower. Doddle. And there's good news for all those hardened sports car fans, namely idiots who insist on driving all year round with the roof off, even in winter, because the seats are now finished in this supposedly easy, quick-drying trim, which means at least it will have had a chance to dry out before you've had a chance to get your wax jacket off and towel down your beard. Good luck. Some things thankfully haven't changed, and amongst them is the seat of the pants feel of the Elise. Because it's so light, there's no need for things like power steering to get in the way between the communication between you and the tarmac. Everything is transferred straight through to your fingers and literally to the seat of your pants. You can feel what's going on in every corner of the car, which is all part of the fun of driving it. Whilst the old model had a reputation for superb handling, deservedly so, it could get a little bit skittery, particularly if you were backing off the throttle into a tight bend. They reckon to have remedied that with improvements to the handling of the new car, and it is still superb. There is a little less noise coming through from the engine, which seems quite a bit of a shame to me. I like that raucous feel, but again, this is oriented slightly more towards usability, I think, but you don't sacrifice any of that handling and performance. A good driver will be able to drive it to and hold it on the limit, but if, like me, you prefer to drive a little more flamboyantly, you might not ultimately go as fast, but I'm not in a race, I just want to have fun, then the Elise is superb because it's one car you really can hurl around with as much mad abandon as you like. You can moan all you like about the practicality of clambering in and out of it, and the engine noise as well. In fact, it might be as practical as an ashtray on a motorbike, but for a little over £22,500, it's a sharply focused sports car for people who place driving pleasure as their #1 priority. But if the new Elise is still a little bit too soft for you, why not try one of these? It's the Exige based on the old Elise, and it is wild. What you get is a road-going replica of the old Elise race car. So it looks like a race car, it sounds like a race car, and it goes like a race car. Obviously, the numero uno dominating feature when you're driving the Exige is the engine, mostly because it's in here with you, sitting on your left shoulder like a para. It's loud, raucous and very hot. You physically feel its presence in the heat it gives off. Mind you, one good point for comfort, we've got a hardtop, cosy. Peer through the Ferrari 360 style Perspex cover over the engine and you'll see the same Rover K-Series 1.8 litre engine used in the Lotus 340R. In this particular trim, it'll develop 177 brake horsepower, dash from 0 to 60 in about 4.7 seconds, thank you very much, and onto a top speed of 136. That should do nicely, sir. The rear wing isn't just to look pretty, which I'm not sure if it even does, but it does give you additional downforce at the back, and there's front skirting to give the same effect. And overall, okay, so the shape is based on the old Elise. This is not a soppy looking car, it's much more purposeful and aggressive looking. This has serious presence on road or track. Unlike the Elise, the back end of which will step out quite quickly if you lift off the throttle on the way into a bend, in the Exige it's set up rather differently. It just grips and grips and grips right up to the limit. Invincible you might think, but no. In fact, this car really is set up much more like a proper race car for proper grown-up race drivers, not idiots like me. But being a race car obviously does not mean it doesn't handle. It does, right up to the limit. It is fantastic. You just need a bit of space to practice because every now and again you'll get it into such a tangle that even a really talented driver couldn't pull it out. At least that's my excuse. Oops. As a road car, in fact, the £10,000 premium over the standard Elise is hard to justify, but it is ultimately a toy for petrol heads. And if Brands Hatch or Silverstone track days feature in your diary, then this is the car to have. It's been great in recent years to see the resurgence of interest in two-seater sports cars. But whereas some of the big major manufacturers mess about making sure there's luggage space and they're comfy enough on long journeys to accommodate Aunt Agatha's piles, it's really good to see Lotus still making proper, no compromises sports cars. Sure, if you go for the Elise, there is enough room on board for a spare change of underwear. If you go for the Exige, there isn't even that. Ironic really, because this is the car where you're likely to need it. It is a serious tool for driving fast. If you are lucky enough to be considering buying either of these, all I can say is you are going to need a very big toy box to accommodate your new toy. If either was mine, I don't think I'd ever put it away, ever.
On Used Car Motor Week this week, we go German. If I was to say the words, Vorsprung durch Technik, I'm sure you'll know which car I'm talking about. A manufacturer who arguably produces some of the best quality cars on the market today in terms of build, fit and finish. And you'd be perhaps surprised at how little an Audi A4 Avant like this could be yours for. Ever since its launch in 1995, the A4 has been a success and possibly turned around the fortunes of Audi. Here was a car that could compete with BMW and Mercedes. The A4 is a sought-after car. This 1.8 Avant is 3 years old now, but it looks like new. Bits don't drop off these cars, and the doors shut with a very reassuring thud. It's all beautifully finished. Now this has done some 40-odd thousand miles. It's got full service history, and a main dealer this would cost about £10,000, but expect to pay about £1,000 less in a private sale. Now, Avant is Audi terminology for estate, and while this is supposed to be a very capable load carrier, to be honest, in reality, well, it's not. You can get a lot in there and the back seats fold down for those long, bulky items, but I suspect going off on a family holiday will test your packing skills to the limit. Now the A4 on the whole is pretty well equipped. You get power steering, electric windows, an airbag, ABS brakes and a stereo. Things like, well, a sunroof and air conditioning or climate control are also particularly useful. Then you have to choose which model and engine size you want to go for. Do you go for 4-cylinder, a V6, a turbo or a diesel? See what I mean? petrol, then I would recommend you go for the 1.8 turbo, which offers good power and decent fuel economy. If you fancy a diesel, if that's your game, then go for the 110 brake horsepower 1.9 TDI, which, get this, averages nearly 55 miles to the gallon. It almost makes me want to buy one. No, what on earth am I saying? Here's our price guide for what to pay for an A4. A 1.8 N-Reg with 75,000 miles, around 6 grand. P-Reg 1.6 SE with 60,000 miles, £8,500. A 1.8 Turbo R-Reg with average miles, £11,000. Or how about a 1.9 TDI, 36,000 miles for £8,500. Now, the key to buying a quality car like this is condition, service history and specification. And if all those things fit into place, then there's very little else to go wrong. Do bear in mind, if you are looking for a used A4, that there's a new A4 due out in March 2001, and that's going to have an effect on the value of these cars. So this week's used car tip is the Audi A4.
After the break, Rob Hallam gives some thought to the future for Rover.
Survival. In these harsh times of financial unrest and unstable economies, it's all about survival of the fittest. You've got to be able to withstand the harshest environments without anyone ever realising that you're really struggling. Now that's especially true for car companies, and one in particular is Rover. Now, not too long ago, the car that pulled up outside number 10, well, it was a Rover. But now, all the statesmen and politicians, well, they all drive Jags. I mean, Prescott's got 2 of them. So cars like the Rover 75, they don't get a look in. And then to make matters worse, Rover found the BMW rug pulled from under their feet. So once more, they're in British hands, which is great. And who are their proud British owners? Well, Alchemy. No, I've never heard of them either. Well, whoever Alchemy are, they've certainly got cracking plans for the future of Rover, and that includes rebadging all the cars as MG, and there's even tie-ins with companies like Lotus and Lola. But for now, they've still yet to attract that big name partnership that they desperately need. So they're going to have to go it alone, and good luck to them. But if they are going to survive in the short run, they need good cars. Well, first impressions of the 75, very, very nice, very stately. And one thing that Rover do that the Japs can't is wood. Who was it that said that all cars are built equal, yet some cars are built more equal than others? Well, it's true to say that 20 years ago you could really end up buying a nail unless you spent an absolute fortune on your car. But nowadays, well, there's no such thing really as a badly built car. And this Rover 75, it's not a badly built car. It's certainly a million miles away from an 80s Metro. And the best feature about this car, well, it reeks of Britishness both inside and out. Don't get me wrong, it's no S-Type, but you do feel very, very special and quite stately when you're driving it. Now, there is a bit of an odd mix of styles on the interior of the Rover 75. For starters, the dashboard, we've got these lovely cream, chrome retro dials, and yet a lot of the switchgear is very plastic, very Germanic. But I guess to be fair to Rover, even the likes of Aston Martin have to raid the big old Ford parts bin now and again. Now, politically, it was impossible for Rover to design and build a car that's going to compete and take sales off the BMW 3 Series. So the 75 was designed as a budget luxury saloon, kind of a cut-price Rolls-Royce. Now that's all well and good, but people that are buying a luxury car, well, they're really buying into the image, and at the minute, Rovers ain't so hot. But that's where Alchemy's plans come in to rebadge all the cars as MGs. It's a brand that's instantly recognisable worldwide. It has raised the company's profile and it'll shake off a lot of the negative vibes that are associated with Rover. Now here's a thought for you. When the MGB was at its heyday, over half the cars that were manufactured were sold in America. I reckon if you take a Rover 75, put the MG Octagon on it and make it sporty, well, I reckon they'll sell like hotcakes stateside. Well, overall, this is a pretty good car. The build quality is not bad, but the ride is superb. Now, whilst it hasn't got the reputation or the build quality of, say, the Audi A4, what it has got is it's different. And now it's owned by Alchemy, you can genuinely buy British. It's certainly not going to be a hindrance to Rover's fight for survival.
Phew! I've just walked 1,000 miles. Could be closer to 1,000,000 actually. I must have done, because that's the size of the gulf between these two cars, despite them both being from the same manufacturer, General Motors. You see, this is a 5.7 litre V8 engined Chevrolet Corvette. It's not very subtle, and it can drink fuel faster than a snooker player can swig lager. Its exact opposite over here, a humdrum Vectra. If this were just an ordinary one, it'd be about here, 500 or so miles away. But this is even further, because this isn't just an ordinary Vectra. It's a hybrid engined Vectra. Super economical, and we're told, the way of the future. Being a hybrid doesn't mean it has two different types of engine, so there's no electric motors on the wheels type trickery going on. What it does mean is it has two different types of fuel. It can switch between petrol, ooh, nasty planet-wrecking, badger-killing evil stuff, and LPG, which is far better and more efficient burning and better for the environment, and a lot cheaper to run. Now, I'd love to be able to say either that, ooh, it goes all soggy and nasty, it's rather like driving a dead camel, or that all of a sudden it's sparking, exciting, and LPG makes all the difference. But that's just the point. It doesn't make any difference to drive, it feels exactly the same. It's a Vectra, and it'll still be a Vectra in 100,000 miles' time. It makes no difference to the drive, certainly not that you or I would notice. Do you know, it's funny, there are some things you can't wait to tell the world about your car, so it gets scrawled all over the tailgate with initials like SRI. Somehow LPG doesn't feature amongst them, so the only real outside indication of the fact it is an LPG car is that it seems to have two petrol caps. One of them, if you look closely, does tell you LPG. The secret's out. If all of this has got you tempted to do your bit to save the planet, and let's be honest, save more than a few quid, fine, by all means go ahead, but you will need to sit down and do your calculations. You don't need to do the kind of interstellar mega mileages that you used to have to do to justify an old-fashioned diesel just to save a few pence. It's not that big a difference, but you will need to do a few miles before you save enough money to justify the extra expense in buying a car that can take LPG. So there it is then, one take of the way cars might be in the future, to supersede these outdated, thirsty, fuel-guzzling, planet-wrecking old dinosaurs. Of course, I better have a go at it just to, you know, contrast. Ha-ha! Oh, come on! Just give me long enough to have a go.
One of the areas most keenly contested amongst car manufacturers these days is the sports utility vehicle market. That's a 4x4 with alloys to you and me. Well, the competition just got even keener with this, the Vauxhall Frontera Sport V6. Now, you might more commonly associate a car like this with a trip to the supermarket or the twice daily school run, but we've come to the Brecon Beacons in Wales to put this car through its paces where it really matters, and that is off-road. Now, most 4x4 manufacturers have purpose-built tracks that demonstrate what the car can do and not too much of what the car can't. Well, here we're going seriously off-road down a Roman road through the Brecon Beacons, and this isn't purpose-built because we're free to go anywhere, and if we get stuck, we get stuck. Now this car's permanent rear wheel drive for on-road use, but if you're in Sainsbury's and you hit a bit of ice and you want to go 4-wheel drive, then like so many 4x4s these days, there's a switch where you can change on the go.
A quick demonstration for you to show you how good the 4-wheel drive is on a slippery surface. This first corner is in 4-wheel mode, no problems. This second one is just rear wheel drive. The less said the better.
So, how are we doing with our quest to find out if the Frontera can hack it off-road? Well, I have to say, I'm reasonably impressed. You wouldn't have thought any car could go places we've been today, let alone a Vauxhall. I'm a snob. It hasn't got the 4x4 pedigree, but it can do it. Wow, that's the Frontera Sport V6. It really does deliver a lot more than it promises off-road, and at 5 or less than 20 grand, it represents absolutely brilliant value for money. And if you're looking for a car that you want to do the kids' school run in and perhaps the shopping, well, it'll do that as well.
Coming up next week, we bring you the first of 2 shows from the Detroit Motor Show. All the best bits from one of the most important motor shows of the year. Motor Week is moving. From February, you'll find us on Thursday evenings at 10:30 and Sundays at 9:30. And if you want to continue watching some of the best motoring on TV, we're also going all digital, so you'll need to upgrade. Go on, treat yourself. You know we're worth it.